The station floated in the dark between two stars, lit from the outside by cold, pale light, and from the inside by 100 different kinds of glow. Some rooms burned amber. Some pulsed a soft blue. A few glowed in colors that had no name in any human language. The place was called the Reach, and it was the oldest and most respected school in the known galaxy. Hundreds of species had set their best minds there over the centuries. Scholars came from distant systems to study, teach, argue, and learn. To be accepted at the Reach meant something. It meant you were the best. Cole Navarro had no idea what he had gotten himself into. He stood at the arrival dock with a duffel bag over one shoulder and a backpack on the other. He was 29 years old, a little on the thin side, with dark hair that had not been properly cut in about 3 months, and a jacket that still had a coffee stain near the left pocket that he kept meaning to wash out. He was a botanist from the University of New Mexico, and he had spent the last 6 years studying how plants survived in extreme conditions. He was good at his work. His professors had said so. His published papers had caught the attention of the Galactic Consortium's Cultural Exchange Board, which was how he had ended up here, standing on a space station the size of a small city, watching beings walk past him that looked like nothing he had ever seen outside of a textbook. A tall creature floated by on 4 thin legs, its body wrapped in something that shimmered like oil on water. Behind it walked 2 beings that looked like columns of slowly rotating glass. A group of small, round creatures rolled past in a cluster, chirping softly to one another. None of them looked at Cole. They were all busy. He was the only one standing still. He shifted his bag and told himself this was fine. A small drone hummed up to him, projected a soft light in front of his face, confirmed his identity, and directed him down a long corridor toward the residential wing. The walls were smooth and pale, and the floor made no sound under his boots. Every few meters there was a panel showing names, schedules, and notices in a dozen different scripts. Cole could read exactly one of them. He followed the drone and tried not to look like he was lost, even though he absolutely was. His room was small and clean. There was a bed, a desk, a window that looked out into open space, and a shelf that was clearly meant for personal items. He put his bag down, sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, and looked out the window at the stars. Then he reached into the front pocket of his backpack and pulled out a small flat tin. It was a little dented on one corner, and had a faded paper label that read Mixed Chili Blend. He set it on the shelf next to his notebook, which seemed like the right place for it. He had been told he would meet his assigned supervisor the following morning. The supervisor's name, according to the documents he had received, was Professor Cale Voss. The documents had described Cale Voss as the station's leading xenobotanist, a Velhari scholar with over 3 centuries of published research, and one of the most decorated academics currently serving at the Reach. There was a photograph attached. Cale Voss had 6 arms, silver skin, and the kind of expression that suggested he had never once in his long life been surprised by anything. Cole ate a quiet dinner alone in the human-designated food area, which was a small room off the main cafeteria with a basic food printer that could make things that were close to recognizable. He got something that was almost pasta, shook some chili flakes over it from his tin, and read through his notes while he ate. He was not nervous exactly. He was the kind of person who processed nerves by getting very focused and very quiet. He had been that way since he was a kid. His mother had always said he went still like a rabbit when something scared him, and then he got to work. He was going to get to work. The next morning he found Lab 14 on the 3rd research level, after only 2 wrong turns, which he decided to count as a win. The lab was large and very clean and smelled faintly of something that was not quite anything he could name. One whole wall was lined with transparent cases, each one holding a different plant sample. Some of them looked almost Earth-like. Most of them did not. There were things with too many leaves, things with no leaves at all, things that moved slowly in ways that plants were not supposed to move. Professor Cale Voss was standing at a central table when Cole walked in. He was taller than Cole had expected, even accounting for the photograph, and 2 of his 6 arms were folded behind his back, while the other 4 worked at different instruments at the same time. He turned when Cole entered and looked at him the way a person might look at a piece of furniture that had been delivered to the wrong room. Cole introduced himself. He said he was glad to be there, and that he was looking forward to contributing to the lab's work. He said it clearly, and without rushing, the way he had practiced. Cale Voss studied him for a moment. Then he said, in very clean and precise galactic common, that Cole had been assigned to his lab as part of a diplomatic arrangement, that he respected the arrangement, and that he hoped Cole would not find the work too difficult. He said the last part in a tone that made it clear he fully expected Cole to find the work too difficult. He pointed Cole toward a desk in the far corner of the lab. On the desk was a large stack of archived research papers, most of them older than Cole's entire country. Cale Voss explained that organizing and cross-referencing the archive was a good way for a new researcher to get familiar with the field. He then turned back to his instruments and did not say anything else. Cole sat down at the corner desk. He looked at the stack of papers. He pulled out his notebook, uncapped a pen, and started at the top. Around midday, he ate his lunch at the desk. He had brought it from the food room. Something that was close to rice and vegetables, warm enough, nothing special. He reached over to his bag without really thinking about it, took out his tin of chili flakes, and shook a little over the top of his food. Then he put the tin down beside his notebook and kept reading. He did not notice Cale Voss stop working. He did not notice the professor turn slowly from his instruments and stare across the lab at the small dented tin sitting on the corner desk. He did not notice the way Cale Voss's 4 working hands went still, one by one, or the way the professor's silver face shifted into an expression that was very hard to read, but was, if Cole had known Velhari well enough to recognize it, the expression they made when something had gone quietly and seriously wrong. Cole just ate his lunch and turned a page and thought the archive was actually pretty interesting. Cale Voss said nothing. He turned back to his work, slowly, and said nothing at all. But he did not stop thinking about the tin. The second day at the Reach was quieter than the first. Cole arrived at Lab 14 early, before anyone else, and got back to work on the archive stack. He had made a decent dent in it the day before. He had also started making small notes in his own notebook, things that caught his attention, patterns he noticed between different research periods, questions he wanted to ask when the right moment came. He was not sure when that moment would be, given that Cale Voss had spoken to him for a total of about 4 minutes across the entire first day. But Cole was patient. He had spent 2 years once studying a cactus that only changed once a decade. He knew how to wait. The lab filled up slowly. 2 junior researchers arrived around the same time, nodded at Cole without much interest, and went to their stations. One of them was a Veldari, like Cale Voss, young by the look of him, with lighter silver skin and quick, careful movements. His name, Cole had gathered from a tag near his station, was A. Sol. The other was a short, broad being with dark plated skin, whose species Cole had not yet identified. They worked quietly and professionally, and treated Cole the way everyone on the station seemed to treat him. Like a piece of furniture that was not quite in the right place, but also not worth moving. Cole ate his breakfast at his desk. It was early, and the food room had only had a few things available, so he had grabbed something simple, a grain bowl, warm and a little bland. He shook some chili flakes over it from his tin, the same way he did every morning at home, the same way he had done every morning for years. He ate quickly, put the tin back beside his notebook, and kept reading. He did not see Saul watching him from across the room. He did not see Saul glance at the tin, then glance at Cale Voss's empty chair, then glance back at the tin again. Saul was a good researcher. He was also, as young researchers often are, deeply curious about things he was not supposed to touch. The tin sat there on the corner desk, small and dented and completely ordinary looking. Cole had stepped out briefly to find a bathroom, which had taken him longer than expected, because nothing on this station was where it looked like it should be. While he was gone, Saul walked over to the corner desk, looked at the tin for a moment, and carefully tipped a very small amount of the red powder into a sample collection tube. Then he walked down the corridor to Lab 7, where the station's biological threat scanner was kept, and ran the sample through it. He did this because he was curious. He would later describe it as the worst decision he had made in his academic career. Cole was back at his desk and deep into a paper about root system chemistry on gas giant moons when the alarm went off. It was a steady, calm tone that filled the corridor and caused every door in the research wing to seal automatically. A soft yellow containment field shimmered to life around Cole's section of the lab, and a recorded voice in several languages announced that a biological threat indicator had been triggered in Lab 7, and that all personnel should remain in place. Cole looked up from his paper. He looked at the containment field around his desk. He looked at his tin of chili flakes. He had a feeling, sudden and clear, that these things were probably connected. Cale Voss arrived within 2 minutes. He came through the sealed door using his override code, moving fast for someone with such long legs and 6 arms, and went straight to the holographic display that had pulled up automatically in the center of the lab. Saul was already there, looking like he very much wished he were somewhere else. Cale Voss looked at them. Then he looked across the room at Cole, who was sitting inside the containment field with his notebook on his lap and his tin of chili flakes on the desk beside him. He walked over. He stopped just outside the field. He looked at the tin for a long moment, and then looked at Cole, and asked, in a voice that was very controlled, whether that container belonged to him. Cole said yes, it did, and asked if there was a problem. Cale Voss turned back to the display, and pulled it wider, so it filled the whole center of the room. The results from the scanner expanded with it. Line after line of analysis data, chemical breakdowns, toxicity ratings, threat classifications. Cole could read some of it, not all of it, but enough to understand that the scanner was very upset about something. Cale Voss began to explain. He did it the way he did everything, which was precisely and without any wasted words. The red powder in the sample, he said, contained a compound called capsaicin, along with several other alkaloid compounds. In concentrated form, these compounds caused immediate chemical burns to mucous membranes and soft tissue. They triggered extreme neurological pain responses in most known species. In Veltari physiology specifically, respiratory exposure to a sufficient quantity caused paralysis of the breathing passages within seconds. He paused there and let that land. Then he continued. The compounds were lethal to 4 of the 7 most common species in the Galactic Consortium, at doses smaller than a single grain of the powder. The lab was very quiet. Saul had taken a small step back, without appearing to notice he had done it. Cale Voss looked at Cole and waited. Cole looked at the display. He looked at his tin. He picked up the tin and turned it over in his hands, the way he had done 1,000 times before. Then he looked back at Cale Voss and said that back on Earth, people usually put this on eggs. Nobody spoke. Cole tried again. He said it was also good on pasta, on rice, on grilled chicken, on pizza. He said his father used it on potatoes. He said his grandmother kept a larger jar of a stronger version and used it in almost everything she cooked. He said it pretty much went with anything, really, depending on how much heat you wanted. Cale Voss stared at him. Cole looked at the scanner results again and then back at the professor. He said the compound, the capsaicin, it did burn a little. He said humans could feel it. That was actually kind of the point. But you got used to it, and there was a good feeling that came afterward, so people kept eating it. He said some people even competed to eat the hottest versions they could find, just to see if they could handle it. He said there were entire festivals dedicated to it back home. The containment field hummed softly between them. Cale Voss looked at Cole the way someone looks at a problem they are going to need to sit with for a long time. Then he looked at A. Saul, who was still standing near the display and clearly wishing very hard that he had not touched the tin. Then he looked back at Cole. He asked, slowly and carefully, what else Cole had been putting on his food since he arrived at the Reach. Cole thought about it for a moment. He said he also had some black pepper, a small jar of garlic powder, and a little bag of a mixed spice blend his mother had packed for him before he left. He said he could go get them from his room if that would be helpful. Cale Voss said, in a very quiet voice, that yes, that would be helpful. He also said that the containment field was going to stay on for a little while longer. Cole nodded like that was a completely reasonable thing to say, set his notebook back on his knee, and went back to reading his paper while he waited. He was on a very interesting section about root chemistry, and he did not want to lose his place. The containment field came down the following morning. Cale Voss had spent most of the night reviewing the initial scanner results, and had decided that Cole was not an active threat to the station, which Cole felt was a reasonable conclusion to reach. He had also filed a formal research request with the Consortium Science Board, requesting permission to begin a structured study on human dietary habits and their relationship to known toxic compounds. The board approved it within 4 hours, which was unusually fast. Cale Voss suspected that several board members were simply very alarmed and wanted answers as quickly as possible. Cole was told about the study over a simple breakfast in the food room. Cale Voss sat across from him and explained it plainly. He said that what had come out of the scanner the previous day was serious enough that it could not simply be noted and filed away. He said that Cole's willingness to participate in the research was important, and that he hoped Cole understood the significance of what they were dealing with. He said all of this in his usual precise and measured way, like he was reading from a document he had already edited several times. Cole said that was fine with him, and asked if he could keep eating his normal meals during the study. Cale Voss paused, and then said yes, that was actually the point. So it began. The first thing Cale Voss asked for was the collection of items Cole had brought from his room. Cole brought them the next morning in a small canvas bag, and laid them out on the examination table one by one. The chili tin, a short round jar of garlic powder with a slightly sticky lid, a small paper bag of ground black pepper that had left a faint dark ring on everything near it in his bag, and a flat tin, slightly larger than the chili one, that his mother had pressed into his hands at the departure terminal back in Albuquerque. It was labeled Home Blend, and it had things in it that Cole could only partially identify because his mother had never fully explained what went into it, and seemed to consider the recipe a personal matter. Cale Voss looked at the items on the table for a moment. Then he called in 2 colleagues. The first was Viroth, a Shorak researcher who worked 2 floors up in the chemical biology division. Viroth was built like a tall, narrow triangle, with pale crystalline skin and 3 eyes that moved independently of one another. He was extremely good at breaking down chemical compounds, and was known across the station for being thorough, to the point that other researchers sometimes found it exhausting. The second was a younger Unen researcher named Fosek, who breathed a slightly different mixture of gases than the rest of the lab, and wore a small filtration piece around the lower part of his face. Fosek was quiet and careful, and took notes on everything. Cole shook hands with both of them. Neither of them had shaken a human hand before, and both of them managed it with the kind of polite concentration people give to something they have been warned about. They started with the garlic powder. Virath ran it through the scanner, while Fosek took careful notes, and Kael'vas stood with 2 of his arms crossed, and 4 of them doing other things at once, which Cole had come to understand was just how Kael'vas stood. The results came back, and Virath read them out in a flat, professional voice. The sulfur compound released by the garlic powder during digestion was directly toxic to Unen respiratory tissue. Mild exposure caused irritation and inflammation. Significant exposure caused permanent damage to the breathing membranes. Fosek wrote this down without any visible reaction, which Cole suspected took some effort. Cole said that garlic was one of the most common cooking ingredients on Earth. He said it went into pasta sauces, stews, roasted vegetables, bread, dressings, soup, and about 100 other things. He said a lot of people grew it in their gardens. He said his grandmother could go through an entire bulb in a single meal. Fosek stopped writing for a moment and then continued. They moved to the black pepper. The results there were, if anything, more uncomfortable for Kael'vas specifically, because the active compound in black pepper, piperine, had a direct and well-documented effect on Veldhari neurological tissue. At the concentration found in a typical human serving of ground pepper, contact with Veldhari skin or membranes would cause immediate numbness, loss of fine motor control, and in larger doses, temporary shutdown of secondary nerve clusters. Cole had been shaking this over his food every single day in a lab where Kael'vas and Asol both worked. Kael'vas looked at the results for a long time without speaking. Cole said he was sorry about that, and that he had not known. He said black pepper was so common at home that it sat on basically every table in every restaurant in the country. He said most people did not think of it as anything except pepper. Kael'vas said he understood and moved on, in the careful way of someone filing information somewhere they could deal with it later. The home blend tin was last, and it turned out to be the most eventful. Virath separated it into its individual components and ran each one through the scanner. There were 7 distinct ingredients. 4 of them came back with individual hazard flags. One of them, a dried and ground version of a small brown seed that Cole eventually identified as mustard, produced a vapor compound during digestion that Virath noted with a very still expression was used in diluted form as a deterrent chemical by at least 2 galactic military organizations. Cole said his mother put it in potato salad. Nobody said anything for a little while after that. It was Fosek who finally asked the question that everyone in the room was thinking. He asked, in his soft and careful way, whether humans felt any of this. Not in a challenging way. Genuinely. He wanted to know if the compounds had any effect on the humans eating them. Cole thought about it and said, yes, absolutely. He said the chili burned, which was part of why people liked it. He said too much garlic gave you bad breath, and sometimes an upset stomach if you went overboard. He said, black pepper made you sneeze if you got too much in your nose at once. He said the mustard was sharp and strong, and you could definitely taste it. Fosek asked if any of that stopped people from eating those things. Cole said no, not really. He said if anything, people tended to add more. Fosek wrote that down and underlined it twice. By the end of the day, the table was covered in scanner printouts, and Virath had filled 3 separate analysis logs. Kael'vas stood at the head of the table and looked at everything spread out in front of him. Cole sat at the end of the table, drinking from a small cup of coffee he had brought down from the food room. And it was Virath who noticed the cup first, and asked with a very measured kind of calm, what exactly was in it. Cole said it was coffee. He said it had caffeine in it, which gave you a bit of energy in the morning. He said most adults back home drank at least 1 cup a day. He said some people drank 4 or 5. Virath asked slowly if he could run a sample through the scanner. Cole said sure, and slid the cup across the table. The three researchers gathered around the results when they came back. Cole watched their faces from across the table. He had gotten reasonably good over the past 2 days at reading alien expressions. And what he saw on all three of them was the same thing. It was the look of people who were beginning to understand that this was going to be a much bigger study than any of them had planned for. Virith did not sleep that night. This was not unusual for him. He was the kind of researcher who, once he had pulled on a thread, could not put it down until he understood exactly where it led and what it was connected to. He had been that way since he was young, and it had made him very good at his work, and it had also made him very bad at having a normal evening. His colleagues had learned to leave him alone when he got a certain look in his three eyes. He had that look now. He sat in his office on the second floor of the chemical biology division, with the scanner results from the day spread across his desk, and a larger thought sitting at the back of his mind that he kept returning to. The thought was this: they had tested 4 items from one human's personal bag. 4 items that a single young man from a place called New Mexico had packed for himself the way anyone packs a few small comforts before a long trip. And every single one of those items had come back flagged. That meant the question was not really about Cole's bag anymore. The question was about Earth. Virith pulled up the Galactic Entry Documentation Database and searched for humanity's submission. Every species that joined the consortium was required to submit a general record of their home world, including geography, biology, climate, and a basic catalog of plant and animal life. Most species put real effort into these documents. They wanted to make a good impression. Humanity's submission had been filed about 3 years ago, when humans had first made contact with the outer network. It was thorough. Humans, it turned out, were very good at making catalogs. Their botanical section alone ran to several thousand entries, cross-referenced by region, climate, and common use. Common use was the column that caught Virith's attention. He started running entries through the consortium's toxicology index. He started at the top of the list and worked his way down. He told himself he would do 100 entries and then stop for the night. He did not stop. By the 3rd hour, he had flagged enough entries to fill a separate document. By the 5th hour, that document was longer than most research papers he had published in his career. He sat back in his chair at one point and looked at the ceiling and breathed slowly for a moment, because he was Shorak, and that was how Shorak processed things that were difficult to absorb. And then he leaned forward and kept going. The sun, or the nearest equivalent the reach had to one, was starting to fill the corridor windows with pale light when Virith finally stopped. He had gone through roughly a third of the human botanical catalog. He compiled everything into a single clean report, and then sat looking at it for a long moment, before sending a message to Kale Voss, asking him to come in early. Kale Voss arrived at Virith's office within 20 minutes, which meant he had also not slept much. He read the report standing up. Virith watched him read it, and noted, with some professional interest, that Kale Voss's expression went through several changes, before settling into something very still and very serious. When he finished, Kale Voss set the document down on the desk, and sat in the chair across from Virith, and said nothing for almost a full minute. Then he said he wanted Cole brought in. Cole arrived shortly after, slightly rumpled, carrying his notebook and a cup of coffee, because he had apparently not been told about the coffee yet, and no one had wanted to be the one to bring it up first thing in the morning. He sat down across from Kale Voss and Virith, and looked at both of them, and said, "Good morning." Virith pulled up the report on the room's display, and walked Cole through it, piece by piece, which took a while, because there was a great deal of it. The common spice called nutmeg, which Cole confirmed was used in baked goods, warm drinks, and certain sauces, contained a compound that caused vivid hallucinations, severe organ stress, and in large doses, organ failure in most known galactic species. Cole said yes, Too much nutmeg was not a good idea, and that people generally knew that. Virath moved on. A cooking oil pressed from mustard seeds, widely used across several human cuisines, was chemically close enough to a class of irritant agents that it had been listed as a restricted substance on 3 consortium member worlds. Cole said it was very good in certain rice dishes, and that his uncle cooked with it every week. A root vegetable called horseradish, when grated or processed, released a sharp volatile compound into the air around it. In Veltari physiology, concentrated exposure to that compound would cause immediate eye and airway irritation severe enough to empty a room. In higher concentrations, it could cause temporary blindness. Cole said it made your eyes water a bit when you cut it, and that the feeling in your nose was very strong, but that it was excellent with beef, and that most people had a jar of it in the back of their refrigerator. Kael'vas, who had been listening to all of this without speaking, asked Cole at that point to describe what a refrigerator was. Cole explained it was a cold storage box for food. Kael'vas asked if most humans had one. Cole said yes, almost everyone. Kael'vas asked if most of those refrigerators contained horseradish. Cole thought about it and said probably not everyone, but it was pretty common. He said it was the kind of thing that sat at the back and got used a few times a year. Kael'vas nodded slowly and said nothing. Virath continued. The report covered black mustard seeds, raw onion, cloves, strong vinegar, and a fermented paste used widely in one region of Earth that contained a combination of compounds that together affected Shorak cardiovascular tissue in ways that Virath said he was not going to describe in detail, but that were not good. Cole said the paste was called something different depending on where you got it, and that it was very popular on a particular style of sandwich. By the time Virath reached the end of the section he had covered, the display was filled with flagged entries, color-coded by severity. It looked, Cole thought, like a map of a very bad neighborhood. Kael'vas folded 2 of his hands together and looked at Cole very carefully. He asked whether humans, in general, were aware of any of this. Cole looked at the display. He looked at all the flags, and the severity codes, and the restricted substance listings, and the toxicology notes. He thought about his mother's kitchen, and his grandmother's stove, and the little tin on his shelf, and the jar of horseradish that had been in his family's refrigerator for as long as he could remember. He said that people generally knew that spicy food was hot, that some spices were stronger than others, and that a few things were not good for you in very large amounts. He said most of it was just normal cooking knowledge, the kind of thing you picked up growing up. He said he could go get the rest of his spices if they wanted to keep going. Virath looked at Kael'vas. Kael'vas looked at Cole. Then Kael'vas picked up his communication device and filed a formal notification to the Consortium's Health and Safety Board, the Academic Review Committee, and 2 government liaison offices, recommending an urgent review of the Human Botanical Catalog before any further cultural exchange meals were served anywhere on the station. Cole drank his coffee while Kael'vas typed. He thought the report had been very interesting. He also thought that the mixed spice blend in his mother's tin still had a few ingredients they had not gotten to yet, and that Virath was probably going to want to look at those too. He decided to mention that after Kael'vas had finished typing. The paper took 6 weeks to write and another 2 to pass through the consortium's review process, which Kael'vas said was unusually fast, and Virath said was not fast enough. It was published on a quiet Tuesday morning under the title Adaptive Toxin Tolerance and Culinary Normalization in Homo Sapiens, a Preliminary Survey, and it had 4 names on it: Kael'vas, Virath, Fosek, and at the end, Cole Navarro, listed as co-investigator and primary subject, which Cole thought was a slightly strange combination, but did not argue with. By the end of that same Tuesday, the paper had been downloaded more times than anything else published on the consortium's academic network that month. By the end of the week, 3 separate galactic health and safety boards had sent formal requests for copies and a follow-up briefing. 2 member governments had contacted the consortium's liaison office, asking for a meeting. A science journal that had never in its 400-year history published anything related to human biology requested the rights to reprint the full study in its next edition. Cale Voss handled all of this with the same precise and unhurried manner he handled everything. He scheduled the briefings, replied to the journals, and forwarded the government requests to the appropriate offices. He did not say much about any of it to Cole directly, but Cole noticed that the professor moved through the station a little differently after the paper came out. Not with more pride, exactly. More like a man who had found something genuinely surprising after 3 centuries of looking, and was still quietly turning it over in his mind. The Reach itself changed around Cole, in small but noticeable ways. Researchers who had barely looked at him before started stopping by Lab 14. Some of them had questions about the study. Some of them had questions about Earth in general. A young Valdhari graduate student named Ori, who could not have been more than 40 years old by her species count, came by one afternoon and stood near Cole's desk for a moment before asking him very politely if he could describe what chili actually tasted like. Cole thought about it carefully, because he wanted to give her a real answer. He said it was sharp and bright at first, like a quick heat at the front of your mouth. Then it spread and got deeper and warmer. He said the strongest kinds built up over a few seconds, and then just sat there, making everything feel very alive. He said it was hard to explain properly, because it was one of those things that language did not quite catch. Ori listened to all of this very seriously and wrote something in her notes. Then she asked if it was painful. Cole said yes, a little, depending on how much you used, but that the pain was part of it. You would not want to take the sharpness out, because without it the whole thing would just be warm and flat, and not interesting anymore. Ori wrote that down too and thanked him and left. Cole went back to his work and thought that was probably one of the nicer conversations he had had on the station so far. Aesol, who had started all of this by taking a sample from Cole's tin without asking, had been quietly mortified about it for weeks. He apologized to Cole formally and in some detail one morning, the way Valdhari apparently apologized for things, which involved a specific posture and a careful choice of words. Cole told him it was genuinely fine, and that if Aesol had not run the sample, none of the study would have happened, and they would all have missed something important. Aesol seemed to find some comfort in that, though he still looked a little pained every time someone mentioned the containment field. The news reached Earth about a month after the paper was published. Cole found out through a message from his mother, which arrived one morning while he was eating breakfast in the food room. She said his father had seen something about it on the news, and that the whole family was very proud of him, and also that she wanted to know if the researchers needed more of the home blend, because she had plenty. Cole wrote back and said he would ask, and then he did ask, and Viroth said yes with a speed that suggested he had been hoping someone would bring it up. The coverage back home was hard to summarize. Some of it was serious. Scientists and food historians and biologists gave long interviews about human dietary evolution and why the species had developed the ability to process compounds that were dangerous to almost everything else alive. A few universities announced new research programs. A government science office published a statement that was cautious and professional, and did not say very much. But most of what got shared around was not the serious coverage. It was a piece written by a food writer in Austin named Deb Alcott, published in a small online magazine, with a title that Cole's mother sent him in a separate message, along with 3 laughing faces. The piece was called, "Turns Out Our Barbecue Rub is a Weapon of Mass Destruction," and honestly, same. It was funny, and warm, and a little proud, and it got passed around so many times that Deb Alcott spent the following 3 weeks doing interviews. She later said it was the most attention anything she had ever written had received, and that she had not expected a paper about capsaicin to be the thing that made her career, but that life was strange, and you had to work with what you were given. Back on the Reach, the study continued. There were still large sections of the human botanical catalog that Virath had not gotten through, and he worked on it steadily and methodically, the way he did everything. The findings kept coming. Each new entry that came back flagged was noted and recorded and added to the growing file. And after a while, the file became its own separate project that Fosek was managing full-time. The Consortium Science Board had quietly recommended that the human food area on the station be given better ventilation and a slightly more serious set of handling guidelines, which Cole thought was probably fair. Kael'Vos never made a big announcement about any of it. He was not that kind of person, and had not become that kind of person just because a paper of his had become famous. He still arrived early and left late, and expected precise and careful work from everyone in his lab. He still corrected errors without softening them, and asked hard questions during reviews, and moved through the world as though he had seen most of it before, and was only interested in the parts he had not. But he had moved Cole's desk out of the corner. It was now near the center of the lab, next to Asol Station, with a clear view of the sample cases along the wall. Kael'Vos had not said anything about the change. He had just come in one morning and rearranged things and moved on, and Cole had sat down at his new desk without commenting on it, because he understood that some things did not need to be said out loud to mean something. One evening near the end of his third month on the Reach, Cole sat at his desk after the lab had emptied out, and wrote a short entry in his field notebook. He wrote that it had been a strange few months, that he had been scanned and studied and looked at from every angle by some of the most careful minds in the galaxy, that he had spent a significant amount of time sitting inside a containment field and answering questions about potato salad, that he had come here to study plants in extreme conditions, and had ended up being, in some ways, the most interesting subject in the room. He wrote that he was not sure what to make of all of it, except that it was good, that the work was real and the people around him were real, and that doing something that mattered, even by accident, was still doing something that mattered. Then he reached over to the shelf above his desk, picked up the small dented tin with the faded label, and shook a little chili over his dinner. He ate quietly in the empty lab, with the stars outside the window and the hum of the station all around him, and thought that strange was probably fine. Strange was, in fact, pretty good.